There are truths about women, about mothers, that civilizations once whispered around temple fires and then forgot. Before religion named the divine, before science measured the mind, the first mystery was the woman who bled yet did not die, who carried life and gave it form. She was the beginning of awe and of fear. In that single paradox of creation and destruction, humankind saw both salvation and terror. But as centuries passed, the image of the mother was polished, purified, rewritten until her shadows disappeared. What remained was a statue of virtue, silent, smiling, stripped of rage and hunger. The raw animal within her, the one evolution had shaped to guard and devour, was sealed behind glass. The scholars called it progress. The priests called it holiness. The mothers themselves simply learned to hide it. Dark academia, that old cathedral of intellect, knew what it was burying. It saw the animal codes that ruled beneath. Maternal tenderness, the instinct that could love and destroy in the same breath. It found evidence that motherhood was not only gentle, but strategic, selective, and sometimes cruel. Yet to publish such findings would mean confessing that civilization was built on the manipulation of instinct, not the triumph of reason. So they buried it under Latin phrases and ethical veils, pretending that the maternal heart was a symbol of pure selflessness. This is the secret academia hid, not out of ignorance but out of terror, because to face the primal truth of motherhood is to confront the source of all morality and all manipulation at once. It is to see that tenderness itself was born from evolutionary ruthlessness. And so the myth was rewritten, the dark chapters were torn out, the laboratories that found them were forgotten. But truth, like blood, always leaves a trail. A part 1, the first mother, nature's ruthless design. Long before words, before gods, before civilization, there was only survival. In that raw world, the female body became the battlefield where nature fought to preserve its lineage. Every cell, every hormone, every impulse was sculpted by one command: protect the offspring that carries your future. But nature, indifferent to human sentiment, crafted this command with cruel precision. She gave the mother both infinite tenderness and strategic blindness. In evolutionary terms, the mother's purpose was not moral, it was mathematical: to invest in the strong and withdraw from the weak, to choose where life would flourish and where it would quietly end. Anthropologists uncover this pattern across species. Mothers that abandon the runt, that devour the dying, that favor the child with the highest chance of survival. In humans, this cruelty was refined into silence. Instead of claws, selection used emotion. Averted eyes, subtle neglect, cold distance disguised as exhaustion. Ancient societies understood this instinct. That is why early myths portrayed the mother goddess with both arms of creation and destruction. In Mesopotamia, she was Tiamat, the sea dragon who gave birth to the gods and then devoured them. In Hindu cosmology, she was Kali, whose love was inseparable from annihilation. These cultures did not fear the darkness within the maternal, they revered it. They knew that without that ferocity, the fragile line of life would have perished. But when philosophy replaced myth and academia replaced ritual, the story changed. The maternal became sentimentalized. Evolutionary truth, too feral, too unsympathetic, was recast as pathology. The scholars preferred the idea of maternal sacrifice over maternal selection. They needed morality to triumph over instinct, because civilization itself was built on that illusion. Yet the data never truly disappeared. In the margins of biology papers, in the private notes of forgotten scientists, the pattern persisted. Mothers unconsciously allocate more attention, nourishment, and emotional energy to the offspring they perceive as viable. Studies show that even micro-expressions, eye contact, tone of voice, shift toward the child who seems stronger, healthier, or more socially promising. Evolution's algorithm whispers through these gestures. It is not cruelty. It is efficiency written in the language of love. Part 2. The forbidden emotion. To understand why academia buried this truth, one must understand what emotion it reveals. Not tenderness, but possession. The mother does not simply love, she claims. Her bond is an empire built from biology, where the child is both treasure and territory. Modern culture romanticizes this as nurturing, but evolution paints it in darker hues. The maternal impulse arose not merely to comfort the young, but to control the flow of genes. Psychologists have long noted the duality of maternal emotion: affection intertwined with domination, empathy shadowed by jealousy. The mother watches over her child, not only to protect, it from harm, but to ensure that her own genetic legacy is not diluted, her influence not replaced. This instinct, subtle yet pervasive, shapes the architecture of family and society. It is the invisible hand that molds loyalty, guilt, dependence. When early scientists in the 19th century began to analyze maternal behavior through this evolutionary lens, the findings were scandalous. They suggested that the nurturing instinct was not altruism but reproductive strategy, that the selfless mother was, in truth, an agent of natural selection wearing a mask of love. The implication was unbearable for an age that worshipped moral purity. So the findings were rewritten, dismissed as pseudoscience or moral corruption. The archives closed. The dark side of the maternal archetype was exiled from the lecture hall. Yet the evidence persisted in art, literature, and myth. Medea's vengeance, Demeter's wrath, the virgin's silent grief, all echo the same forbidden truth. The mother's love is not passive. It demands tribute. It defines boundaries. It punishes betrayal. The child who rejects her, the world that endangers her lineage, become enemies of her ancient order. Modern evolutionary psychology now rediscovers what myth once knew: that maternal emotions are adaptive programs balancing nurture and control. The oxytocin that binds a mother to her child also heightens suspicion toward outsiders. The same hormone that fosters tenderness can fuel possessiveness and aggression. To love deeply is to guard fiercely, and to guard fiercely is to fear loss more than death. Academia buried this knowledge because it exposed the primal machinery beneath human virtue. It showed that even the most sacred bond is carved by survival, not by reason or morality. The intellectuals could not accept that civilization's moral heart beats to the rhythm of animal instinct, so they cloaked it in poetry, calling it unconditional love. Part 3. The Maternal Shadow. When love turns to control, civilization tells stories of the nurturing mother, the one who gives, who forgives, who folds the world into her arms and turns pain into comfort. But evolution whispers a more complicated tale. When love becomes absolute, it seeks to shape, to dominate, to decide what the beloved must become. The maternal shadow begins there, in the instinct to design destiny for the sake of protection. Within the human psyche, this impulse grows into a web of subtle control. The mother who fears losing her child's devotion weaves invisible threads of dependence. The child, sensing the sacredness of that bond, hesitates to cut them, mistaking captivity for care. Evolution engineered this emotional trap with exquisite precision. A mother who could keep her offspring near ensured their survival. A child who felt guilt in separation remained within reach of protection. From this simple equation came the psychology of attachment, loyalty, and ultimately control. Academia once mapped these patterns in the early 20th century. Behavioral scientists observed that maternal behavior oscillates between warmth and regulation, between nurture and ownership. Yet their conclusions, written in the quiet tones of research, hinted at something dark: the mother's unconscious desire to remain indispensable. That truth frightened a culture built on the illusion of pure love. So as always, the findings were diluted, sanitized, and renamed. What was once called possessiveness became protective instinct. What was once seen as dominance became guidance. The language softened. The biology remained. In mythic terms, this shadow takes many forms. Hera, queen of the gods, endlessly punishes those who threaten her maternal and marital order. In Slavic lore, Baba Yaga guards her forest, testing all who enter, feeding the worthy, consuming the weak. These figures were not villains. They were mirrors of nature's law. Their ferocity preserved balance. They embodied the truth that love and control are twin aspects of the same cosmic rhythm. Psychologically, the maternal shadow manifests in quieter ways. The unspoken resentment toward independence, the grief masked as advice, the manipulation hidden inside concern. The mother's power lies in emotional gravity, the ability to pull lives into orbit around her. It is not always conscious and rarely malicious. It is the echo of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. To ensure survival, she must matter more than anything else. To stop mattering feels like death. Part 4. The Silencing of Instinct. There was a time when women's bodies spoke for themselves, when birth, blood, and instinct were sacred languages. But the rise of intellect demanded silence. Philosophy called emotion primitive. Theology called it dangerous. Academia called it unquantifiable. So the mother's instinct, once divine, was reduced to biology. and then quietly buried under abstractions. Dark academia was not only a community of scholars, it was a fortress of denial. The thinkers of the Enlightenment sought purity of reason, the dream that man could transcend animal nature. To admit that the mother's choices were driven by instinct rather than moral virtue was to collapse that dream. They reinterpreted maternal devotion as moral example, transforming a primal survival program into the cornerstone of ethics. The mother became the symbol of human goodness precisely because her instinct was too disturbing to name. Across centuries, this silencing created a rift in the female psyche. Women were told that their worth lay in selflessness, yet their bodies continued to speak in the ancient dialect of survival. Postpartum despair, maternal anxiety, and ambivalence toward offspring were not pathologies. They were expressions of evolutionary tension, nature's realism conflicting with culture's idealism. But the universities that studied women studied them as subjects, not as authorities. The mothers themselves were excluded from the conversation about their own biology. When a handful of researchers in the 20th century began uncovering hormonal mechanisms behind maternal aggression and selective attention, their findings were met with unease. Papers disappeared from libraries. Grants dried up. The subject became taboo. A science that once dared to study everything recoiled from the truth that love's origin is not moral but mechanical, and that the machine is guided by fear and necessity. Yet instinct cannot be silenced indefinitely. It finds its voice in art, in whispered confessions, in the unguarded moments of motherhood. A mother who feels anger at her crying infant, then guilt for that anger, is living the same paradox evolution engraved into her flesh. Part 5. The hidden economy of love. Every bond in nature is transactional at some level, but none disguises its transactions more beautifully than motherhood. The exchange is not of money or status, it is of energy, time, and identity. The mother gives part of herself, literally and spiritually, so that another may live. Evolution designed this sacrifice as investment, a trade ensuring the propagation of her genetic future. But when culture romanticized the exchange as unconditional love, the economy became invisible, and the cost immeasurable. To understand this economy, one must see love as currency. Each act of care buys survival, loyalty, continuation. The mother who feeds her child also programs it to remember her voice, to prefer her scent, to return when lost. These invisible imprints ensure that her lineage does not dissolve into indifference, but the same system can demand unbearable payment. When the child grows, independence feels like betrayal, because the investment seeks return. Academia avoided this topic because it dismantled the fantasy of altruism. If love is strategic, then morality becomes negotiation. But evolutionary biology shows the pattern clearly. Cooperation always carries calculation. Even in the depths of tenderness, the subconscious measures benefit and loss. The maternal heart may not think in numbers, yet its impulses reflect ancient equations of cost and reward. This truth need not cheapen love. It can elevate it. To recognize that selflessness arises from strategy is to see beauty in nature's intelligence. The mother's sacrifice is not meaningless. It is purposeful. She is the engine through which life learns balance between giving and preserving. What is tragic is not the exchange itself, but the denial of its reality. When culture insists that love must be pure, mothers are condemned for their fatigue, resentment, or desire for recognition. They are punished for obeying the very system that made humanity possible. The hidden economy also explains why societies venerate motherhood publicly but neglect it privately. Civilization feeds on maternal labor yet refuses to acknowledge the biological truth behind it. To admit the economy is to confront debt, the unpayable debt every generation owes its mothers. And that recognition would require rewriting the moral foundation of the modern world. Part 6. The resurrection of the ancient mother. There comes a point in every civilization when the truths it buried begin to haunt it. The silenced instincts rise like ghosts in the collective unconscious, demanding acknowledgement. Today, in the age of algorithms and artificial wombs, humanity faces the same question its ancestors once whispered before idols. What is the source of life, and why does it demand both love and sacrifice? The answer, once hidden by academia's polished rationalism, returns with the voice of the ancient mother. Her resurrection is not physical, it is psychological. Across literature, art, and quiet personal awakenings, modern minds begin to feel the pulse of something older than morality. Women sense it in the contradictions of motherhood, in the simultaneous exhaustion and transcendence, in the way devotion coexists with anger. Men sense it too, when they witness that maternal power is not gentleness, but gravity, a force that bends their own hearts around it. The old archetype is returning, not as idol, but as understanding. Evolution never meant cruelty, it meant continuity. What academia misnamed darkness was simply the unfiltered logic of life. To love selectively, to guard fiercely, to choose survival over sentiment. These were not flaws, but sacred functions. The suppression of these instincts did not civilize humanity. It fragmented it. By denying the feral intelligence of the maternal, society cut itself from the rhythm of nature. And now, as alienation deepens, the need for reconnection grows urgent. This resurrection begins in awareness. To look at motherhood without filters is to see the artistry of existence. The hormones, emotions, and instincts form a choreography of cosmic precision. A mother's tears and her strength are not opposites. They are two expressions of the same evolutionary genius. Every sleepless night is an ancient ritual. Every heartbeat against her child's skin, a transmission of millennia of survival codes. She carries within her both the beast and the divine. And that duality is the essence of humanity itself. Part 7. The Return of Balance. When the ancient mother rises within consciousness, she does not come to destroy reason but to balance it. For centuries, the masculine principle, order, logic, conquest has governed thought, building cathedrals of knowledge upon the suppression of instinct. But even the grandest cathedral cracks when it denies the soil beneath its stones. The time of balance is the time when Earth reclaims its voice, when the feminine returns not as rival, but as equilibrium. In every age of awakening, civilizations rediscover the necessity of the maternal force, not just in women, but within the psyche of humanity itself. The maternal is the energy of preservation, empathy, and cyclical renewal. Without it, societies become efficient but hollow, intelligent but loveless. The modern crisis of loneliness, alienation, ecological collapse is not technological. It is maternal. The world starves not for progress, but for reconnection. With the nurturing intelligence that sustains life, evolution planted this intelligence deep in the human heart. When a mother protects her child, she mirrors the planet protecting its species. When she sets boundaries, she mirrors nature's law of balance. Even when she chooses distance or discipline, she reflects life's impartial wisdom. To recognize this is to understand that motherhood is not merely personal, it is archetypal. Dark academia once hid this too, maintained the illusion that knowledge could exist without emotion. But knowledge without empathy is sterile, and empathy without understanding is blind. The reunion of the two, reason and instinct, mind and womb, marks the dawn of a wiser age. This does not mean romanticizing suffering or idealizing motherhood. It means acknowledging its truth, that creation requires both giving and letting go, both love and loss. The redemption of the maternal archetype is the redemption of humanity's soul. When we cease to idealize or vilify mothers, and instead see them as the living frontier between biology and transcendence, we recover our wholeness. The shadow that once frightened us becomes guidance. The buried truth becomes foundation. The feminine and the masculine cease their war and begin their dialogue. The truth academia couldn't kill. The story ends where it began, with silence. The silence of libraries where forbidden research still sleeps. The silence of mothers who have always known more than they were allowed to say. The silence that precedes revelation. For centuries, academia buried the evolutionary truth about mothers because it was too vast, too sacred, too uncontrollable. It blurred the boundary between science and myth, between love and survival. But truth does not die, it waits. And now, as humanity faces its own crisis of meaning, that truth returns like a heartbeat rising from the depths. The evolutionary secret is not dark in the way we feared. Its darkness is depth, not evil. It shows that love and strategy, tenderness and ferocity coexist because they must. The mother is not a contradiction. She is completeness. To see her clearly is to see the entire spectrum of existence, the cost of creation, the grace of destruction, the beauty of balance. When we finally understand this, we no longer need to hide behind myths of perfection. We can honor mothers not as saints or martyrs, but as the architects of life's intelligence. We can see that every civilization, every philosophy, every act of compassion traces back to that first fierce decision to protect, to nurture, to endure. That decision is older than language. It is the root of meaning itself. And so the secret that academia buried becomes the wisdom that saves us. The maternal force, once exiled to poetry, returns to philosophy. The instinct, once dismissed as primitive, becomes the blueprint of consciousness. The mother, once idealized or ignored, stands revealed as nature's greatest philosopher, her love, the purest form of intelligence the universe has ever designed. The darkness was never the enemy. It was the womb of understanding. And in facing it, humanity does not lose its light, it finds it.